At 9:17 on a Thursday morning, a presenter at my school district staff workshop pressed play on a relationship podcast, and my husband's voice said, "Naomi and I have spent 8 years proving commitment doesn't need paperwork. David and I had been married for 20 years. The slide on the screen showed an illustrated microphone, 2 empty chairs, and the title "No paper needed with Grant and Naomi." My husband's name was David Grant Mercer. He hated being called Grant. At least, that was what he had told me since our first date. The presenter let the clip run for 40 seconds. Her session was about how the stories families tell about themselves can shape what children repeat at school. The male host described the first apartment he and Naomi had shared, the rule that they never went to sleep angry, and the Sunday walks that kept their relationship honest. I knew the small catch in David's breath before a sentence he had memorized. I knew the way he pronounced "important" without the second T. More than that, I knew the apartment story. The leaking radiator, the orange blanket, and the landlord who arrived wearing golf shoes belonged to the first place David and I rented after our wedding. The presenter paused the audio and asked us to discuss how a private relationship becomes a public story. I wrote the show title on my hand because the notepad in front of me suddenly looked too far away. My name is Claire Mercer. At 46, I worked as a speech-language pathologist for a suburban district outside Columbus. David, 48, managed audiovisual installations across 5 states. We had chosen not to have children and had spent most of our marriage treating his travel as a nuisance, not a warning. I had seen the job up close, the hotel ballrooms, the impatient clients, the feedback problems he could solve in minutes. The work was real. So were the studios, stages, empty meeting rooms, and cities where nobody knew me. When the workshop ended, I asked the presenter, Monica Reyes, where she found the clip. She said No Paper Needed was a small independent show a counselor had recommended. The episode was public, and Monica had purchased an educator's discussion guide through the show's website. She noticed my face and asked whether something was wrong. I said the host sounded like someone I knew and requested the episode link. I did not tell 30 co-workers that I believed the voice belonged to my husband. I drove home after asking my supervisor for the afternoon off. David was in Indianapolis overseeing a hotel conference renovation and was not due back until Saturday. I opened the podcast on my own laptop. There were 186 episodes. The first had been published 8 years and 3 months earlier. The description introduced Grant Mercer and Naomi Vale as partners in life and conversation, who had chosen commitment without legal marriage. No host photograph appeared anywhere on the site. The cover art used silhouettes, and the biography said privacy kept the hosts focused on ideas rather than appearances. Public event listings showed live recordings in Louisville, Indianapolis, Nashville, and Pittsburgh. All 4 cities belonged to David's work territory. The site listed Naomi as a freelance copy editor and workshop facilitator based in Louisville. Her professional page was ordinary, editing packages, testimonials from local authors, and a calendar of weekend classes. There were no photographs of David and no claims that she was married. One archived library notice advertised a No Paper Needed discussion with Grant and Naomi, but used the same illustrated silhouettes as the podcast cover. The privacy had not hidden the relationship from listeners, it had hidden the hosts from anyone who might recognize them. I saved those public pages with their dates. I was not trying to prove every lie in one afternoon. I needed to know whether the voice in my kitchen at breakfast and the voice selling a second life from a stage belonged to the same continuing arrangement. I listened only to the opening of the first episode. David said he and Naomi met at a storytelling workshop in Louisville and spent a year as friends before becoming a couple. That gave me a starting date. I opened the most recent episode because it could establish whether the relationship was current. Naomi asked what they were doing for their 8th anniversary. David said, "Same place, second Sunday." She laughed and reminded him not to book an installation that weekend. The episode had been posted 4 days earlier. I stopped listening. 2 public clips established duration and current intent. The 184 episodes between them could wait until I knew what decisions required them. I reviewed only shared records. Our tax returns included annual Schedule C income under DG Audio Consulting, a side activity David said covered equipment narration and corporate training voiceovers. The gross income began 8 years earlier and ranged from $4,000 to $11,000 a year. The taxes had been paid on our joint returns. I had never seen a client list because David kept a separate personal checking account for side work income and transferred an agreed household amount every month. The description, audio consulting, had been technically true and practically useless. Our joint calendar showed Indianapolis through Saturday and a personal block on Sunday labeled equipment calibration, remote. The upcoming Sunday was the second Sunday of the month. I photographed the shared calendar and downloaded our filed tax returns. I did not enter David's personal email, podcast account, or banking login. At 12:42, I called him. He answered from what sounded like a large empty room. "Are you Grant on No Paper Needed?" I asked. The room stayed silent long enough for a faint electrical hum to become noticeable. Then David said, "Where did you hear that?" "At a district workshop. The presenter played your apartment story." "Claire, it's an audio project." "Are you Grant?" "Yes." The direct admission should have simplified the call. Instead, he rushed to explain that Grant was a performance name, Naomi was a writing partner, and the show dramatized composite relationship stories for discussion. He said listeners understood that the hosts were characters. I read the site description aloud, partners in life and conversation. There was no fiction label and no character credit. David said independent podcasts used branding language and that Monica had misunderstood. Did Naomi misunderstand? I asked. What does that mean? Have you had a romantic or sexual relationship with her? He said, the show makes us sound closer than we are. That is not an answer. Not for a long time. The phrase gave me the same backward answer the podcast had given forward. I asked when the physical relationship ended. David said 5 years ago. I asked whether Naomi believed they were still partners. He said she understood that the public version was separate from real life. Does she know you and I are married and living together? She knows about you. As what? David said a technician needed him and tried to end the call. I told him to answer one word before he left, wife, ex-wife, roommate, or something else. He said, it's complicated, then promised to drive home that evening. I called my sister Erin and asked her to come over before he arrived. Erin was 3 years younger and knew enough about David's travel to understand why 8 years of public episodes could fit inside it. She did not tell me to listen to everything. She brought soup, put my phone on the table, and asked what I needed before nightfall. I scheduled medical testing, saved the 2 public episode pages, and searched our shared financial folder for DG audio. I found invoices David had included with tax records. They named podcast platforms, live event ticket services, editing software, and merchandise fulfillment. The documents did not show secret debt or property. They showed a small functioning media business that I had financed indirectly through joint tax payments while understanding it to be corporate narration. At 3:06, David texted that Naomi might email me because he had told her the workshop exposed the show. He wrote, please don't let her panic before I explain. I replied, I will answer factual questions about my own marriage. At 3:19, a message arrived from the public No Paper Needed address. The sender identified herself as Naomi Vale. Her first sentence read, David says you heard the podcast and may believe our relationship is real. Her second sentence made the first one collapse, I need to know whether you and he ever actually divorced. I answered Naomi with 3 sentences. David and I had never filed for divorce or legal separation. We had lived together continuously, shared a bedroom, filed joint tax returns, and celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary 6 months earlier. I attached a photograph from that dinner with the restaurant receipt visible beside us, then removed the image of my credit card before sending it. Naomi replied within 2 minutes, I am going to call him. I wrote that she could, but I would not participate in a 3-way call with David controlling the order of answers. If she wanted to compare factual timelines after speaking to him, she could call me with Erin present. At 4:08, Naomi asked for my number. Her voice on the phone was lower than it sounded on the show, and she spoke slowly, as if every noun required inspection. She was 43. She had met David at a public storytelling workshop in Louisville 8 years and 4 months earlier, when he attended during an installation project and introduced himself as David Grant Mercer. He told her Grant was the name he used professionally. For almost a year, they exchanged drafts and recorded sample conversations. Then the relationship became sexual. It had not ended 5 years ago. They had spent the previous Sunday together in Indianapolis after he told me he was checking a ballroom installation before the client arrived. Naomi said she had known I existed. David told her our marriage had ended before they met, that the divorce became final 2 years later, and that we kept the house jointly because neither of us wanted to give up its low mortgage rate. He said I traveled often to help my sister and used the house when I worked in the district. Naomi had never asked to see a decree. She had asked why he did not bring her to Columbus. He said I wanted the house kept separate from his next relationship and that honoring that boundary was the least he owed me after a difficult divorce. I thought the privacy was for you, she said. Erin sat beside me with a legal pad. She wrote dates, money, public claims across the top and held it where I could see it. I told Naomi I was not asking for intimate details. I needed dates, anything affecting my health, and anything that touched shared money or property. Their first sexual contact was 7 years and 5 months earlier. They saw each other during work trips, usually once or twice a month, and took 3 short trips that David described to me as manufacturer conferences. They had no joint account, lease, insurance policy, or property. He had not proposed marriage because their public position was that legal marriage was unnecessary. They split podcast income through written invoices, and each reported their own share. The show had grossed a little over $54,000 across 8 years, mostly from live tickets, the guide, and a modest paid subscription. Naomi said costs consumed much of it. That matched the scale of income on our returns. Nothing she described suggested a hidden fortune. It established something more useful. David had not built this life through a single reckless account or a secret apartment. He had fitted it into legitimate travel, ordinary invoices, and hundreds of small choices. Naomi asked whether I knew the podcast stories were partly scripted. I said I had learned that from David 3 hours earlier. She explained that they discussed a real topic, outlined opposing views, and sometimes reassigned details so neither host appeared to be exposing family or former partners. She believed the emotional relationship presented on the show was theirs, even when a specific restaurant, argument, or vacation came from another source. David supplied most of the domestic stories. He called them composites. Naomi edited for pace and privacy. She had once asked whether the people behind those stories had agreed to be used. David told her they were his memories too and that changing names was enough. Until our call, Naomi thought privacy meant disguising a former partner, not replacing a current wife. The apartment with the radiator was mine, I said. Naomi stopped. I described the orange blanket, the golf shoes, and the rule about not going to sleep angry. The rule had lasted 4 months, until David and I learned that forcing resolution at 2 in the morning made every disagreement worse. On the podcast, he had described it as a principle he and Naomi still followed. Naomi said David told her the apartment belonged to a college girlfriend and that he changed the timing to fit the episode. She did not defend the decision. She said, I helped him polish your memory. I told her that sentence was accurate and that accuracy was all I could manage with her that afternoon. We agreed to exchange documents through a new email thread that David could not edit. I sent the calendar entries and the tax pages showing our marital status and DG audio income. Naomi sent the revenue split, event contracts bearing David's legal name, and 2 current messages. In one from Tuesday, David wrote that Sunday would be ours as always, and asked her to bring the outline for episode 200. In another, he said Claire was visiting Erin through Monday, even though Erin lived 12 minutes from our house and I had not slept there in 3 years. Naomi forwarded the messages voluntarily. I saved them without replying to their content. At 5:02, David texted that he was driving and would arrive around 8. He asked me not to make permanent decisions while I was upset. I responded that he should drive safely and bring the laptop and business records he used for DG audio. I did not promise a discussion in private. While we waited, Aaron heated the soup and I opened the educator's discussion guide Monica had purchased. Then I reached a page titled The Practice of Unseen Love. It quoted Grant telling Naomi, "Love is what we repeat when no one is watching." The sentence was printed in large type above questions for couples. I had written those words 12 years earlier. David's mother, Helen, had been undergoing treatment for lymphoma in Dayton. For 7 months, David spent 3 nights a week in her guest room, coordinated prescriptions, and drove her to appointments before returning home exhausted. I handled our house, prepared meals he could freeze, and called Helen every afternoon so David did not carry every update alone. On the night Helen's scan came back clear, I gave David a letter because speaking about those months made both of us cry. The last paragraph said our marriage did not live in anniversaries or photographs. It lived in the ordinary care we repeated when no one was watching. The exact final sentence was, "Love is what we repeat when no one is watching." David kept the letter in a cedar box with our wedding cards and his mother's hospital bracelet. The box was on the top shelf of our bedroom closet. I brought it to the dining table. The letter was still inside, folded along the same lines, in my handwriting. Erin photographed every page and the envelope date. She did not say that a sentence could not be stolen because it had no price. She understood that the value was the private life underneath it. I searched the public podcast site for the sentence. It appeared in episode descriptions and beneath the host's silhouettes on the subscription page. The line had become the show's tagline. Monica confirmed that the district had purchased the guide 3 weeks earlier and forwarded the original file. When I told her the line and story came from my marriage, she agreed to stop distributing it while the district reviewed the source. At 5:41, Naomi sent another file. She and David had been developing a short book based on the first 200 episodes. The proposal was scheduled to go to 3 independent publishers after a live 200th episode recording 6 weeks later. Naomi said she had now checked the opening chapter against what I told her. Its central scene described Grant and Naomi caring for Grant's mother during cancer treatment. In the version David wrote, Naomi filled Helen's freezer, managed the afternoon calls, and left him a letter after the clear scan. The chapter ended with my sentence. Naomi had never met Helen. Helen had died 4 years earlier believing her son was happily married to me. The book proposal called that invented caregiving story, The Private Origin of Grant and Naomi's Public Philosophy. That was the point when the discovery changed shape. David had not only hidden a current relationship inside his travel schedule. He had taken the years when I was his wife in every difficult, unphotographed way and used them to give another couple a history they had never lived. David arrived at 8:11 carrying his work laptop and a gray equipment case. He saw Aaron at the dining table and said he had hoped we could speak as husband and wife. I said he had spent 8 years speaking as somebody else's partner, so he no longer got to define the room. Aaron would stay as a witness and leave if I asked her. David set down the laptop but kept the equipment case in his hand. I asked whether it contained anything needed for the podcast. After a pause, he opened it. Inside were 2 microphones, headphones, a portable recorder, and a folded backdrop printed with the no paper needed silhouettes. He had planned to use them with Naomi on Sunday. I placed Naomi's Tuesday message beside my letter and the book proposal. Did the affair end 5 years ago? I asked. David looked at Aaron, then at me. No. Did Naomi believe we were divorced? She knew there had been a marriage. That isn't what I asked. Yes. Did you tell her I lived here part-time? Claire, I can explain how that started. Answer it. Yes. He admitted using our memories on the show, but when I pointed to the cancer chapter, he called it an early draft. I asked whether he had written it. He stared at my handwriting under his typed version and finally said yes. When he reached toward the letter, I folded it once and moved it beside Aaron. It was a small motion, but his hand stopped in the middle of the table. For the first time that night, something he had always treated as his was physically beyond his reach. Then he complained that being questioned in front of Aaron made honesty impossible. I told him Aaron had not made the answers difficult. The answers had done that on their own. He sat down. His first complete explanation was that the show had begun before the affair. He and Naomi enjoyed talking after the storytelling workshop, made 3 practice recordings, and noticed that their disagreements sounded natural. They chose the unmarried couple premise because it gave every episode a clear point of view. The first episodes earned almost nothing. By the time they became lovers, he said, the fictional frame and the real relationship had become difficult to separate. I asked why that required telling Naomi we were divorced. He said he was afraid she would leave. I asked why that required telling me she was a corporate voiceover client. He said he was afraid I would leave. That was the cleanest summary he gave all night. He wanted both women to stay, so he supplied each of us with the fact most likely to keep us in place. David opened the DG audio records and insisted he had not used our savings or charged podcast travel to his employer. The show had grossed $54,380 in 8 years. After costs and Naomi's share, he had received $21,640 before tax. The totals appeared to match our returns, though I told him an accountant would verify them later. Correct bookkeeping did not make the affair acceptable. It only meant I was not facing a second emergency hidden inside the first. He denied other partners, aliases, debts, property, or any claim by Naomi against our house. I asked whether he had ever planned to divorce me. He rubbed both hands over his face. Then he said, I didn't want to end our marriage. The answer was not reassuring. It meant 8 years had not been a confused passage toward one decision. The arrangement itself was his decision. At home, he had a wife who knew his mother, his medical history, the version of him who forgot to buy furnace filters and fell asleep during documentaries. On the show, he had a partner who admired his reflections, an audience that quoted him, and a name that carried none of his ordinary obligations. He said Grant allowed him to be more thoughtful than he felt in daily life. I asked why Grant could not develop a new thought without taking my letter. David said the sentence had shaped him too and belonged to a period we survived together. You received the letter, I said. You did not write it. And Naomi did not live it. He called the book scene a composite designed to protect Helen's privacy. I pointed to the paragraph where he changed the caregiver's name but preserved Helen's diagnosis, the clear scan, the freezer meals, and the timing of the calls. He had not protected the event. He had replaced me inside it. David said listeners connected to the lesson and that no one knew the source. I said concealment from the audience did not erase the source from the people involved. It only made the use harder to detect. At 9:04, Naomi emailed both of us. She wrote that she was withdrawing from the podcast, canceling the episode 200 event, and notifying the prospective publishers that the proposal contained personal material whose origin had been misrepresented to her. She would preserve the business records and current communications but would not record another private explanation with David. She asked that future logistical contact occur by email. David read the message twice. His first reaction was to say she was panicking and could damage a project they both owned. I watched him become urgent about the show only when the public version of his relationship threatened to disappear. I told him not to use me to manage Naomi's response. She was responsible for her decisions, he was responsible for the facts that produced them. I had already packed a bag for him. He could stay at a hotel or with his brother, but he would not sleep in our room. He asked whether I was throwing him out of a jointly owned house. I'm asking for tonight, I said. If you refuse, Aaron and I will go. David took the bag. Before he went, he asked whether there was any chance to save the marriage if he ended the affair, closed the show, and told the truth publicly. I said I did not yet know what outcome I wanted, but a public confession would not be performed in my name. He would not turn me into the final episode. On Friday morning, I met with a family law attorney named Priya Shah. I brought a concise timeline, copies of shared financial records, and the documents Naomi had voluntarily provided. Priya explained the difference between evidence that helped us understand the marriage and evidence necessary for property and support issues. Ohio's financial process would require formal disclosure if I filed. She advised me not to publish accusations, contact David's employer, empty joint accounts, or negotiate ownership of the show on my own. I followed that advice. I documented the current balances, routed my next paycheck to a new account, and left our joint account funded for the mortgage and ordinary bills. I changed passwords on my personal email and medical portal, not on David's accounts. My health screening was negative, with one follow-up test scheduled according to the clinic's timeline. David stayed with his brother for 12 days and then rented a furnished apartment month to month. We communicated about the house, insurance, and appointments in writing. He delivered complete podcast statements to Priya's secure portal without being asked twice. He also began individual therapy and requested couples counseling. I agreed to 2 discernment sessions, not as a promise to reconcile, but because 20 years deserved a decision made after the first shock had stopped directing every breath. In the first session, David said he loved me and had used the show to escape the flatness he felt in middle age. He said the audience rewarded insight, while home required repetition. The counselor asked what repetition meant to him. He listed groceries, maintenance, checking on relatives, and conversations that did not reach a conclusion. I recognized the work he was describing. It was the same unseen work my letter had named as love. He had turned that sentence into a brand while treating its daily practice as the burden he needed the brand to escape. In the second session, he said he could become transparent, location sharing, open devices, no private travel, no contact with Naomi. I believed those measures might tell me where his body was. They could not tell me whether the next tender thing he said came from remorse, practice, or an outline written for an audience. The injury was not only that David had a secret. It was that he had trained me to hear intimacy as evidence and then manufactured that evidence professionally. I told the counselor I was filing for divorce. David asked if my decision would be different if the podcast had never become public. I said the public feed had allowed me to discover the truth, but it had not created it. The 186 episodes were not the reason I left. They were the record of how often he had chosen not to come home as the person I believed I had married. Filing did not produce a dramatic final confrontation. It produced deadlines. David and I exchanged retirement statements, bank records, tax documents, insurance information, and inventories of property accumulated over 20 years. A CPA performed a limited review of DG Audio because the label had concealed the nature of the work from me. The records confirmed the amounts David had shown at the dining table. There was no second mortgage, hidden apartment, undisclosed investment account, or debt attached to the show. His employer's travel reimbursements matched installation dates, and podcast expenses covered the personal extensions. Financial accuracy did not make David honest with me. It meant the divorce could proceed without inventing a financial crime where the real betrayal was already sufficient. The podcast business itself had little resale value after Naomi withdrew. Its income depended on both hosts, and its largest planned event had been cancelled. David proposed that he keep the feed and all future revenue in exchange for waiving any claim against a small retirement contribution I had received before our marriage. Priya separated sentiment from arithmetic. The retirement contribution was non-marital property supported by records. I did not need to trade it for a failing podcast. Any marital portion of earned podcast income was already reflected in disclosed accounts and tax returns. We resolved the remaining property through ordinary negotiation. David kept his vehicle, work equipment, side business accounts, and the rights he legally controlled in the show. I kept my vehicle, my professional pension interest as allocated under the agreement, and the furniture I had inherited from my grandmother. We sold the house because neither of us could comfortably buy out the other without damaging retirement savings. After the mortgage and sale costs, we divided the equity according to the settlement. I rented a 2-bedroom townhouse 15 minutes from my schools. The second room became an office and a place for Aaron to stay, not a monument to the life I had expected. Naomi contacted me twice after our first call. The first time, she sent confirmation that the book proposal had been withdrawn and the educator's guide removed from sale. She also sent the original contract showing that she and David jointly controlled the edited podcast episodes. She intended to place the public feed on indefinite hiatus while ownership was resolved. I thanked her for the documents. I did not ask her to delete every episode or make a statement identifying me. Some of the memories were mine, some were hers, and many were impossible to separate after years of rewriting. Turning that dispute into a public campaign would have required me to keep listening to a version of my life I no longer wanted to supervise. The second time, Naomi apologized. She did not claim equal injury, and I did not absolve her. She wrote that she should have required proof when David's account of his divorce kept changing around practical questions. She also admitted that the show rewarded a good story so reliably that she stopped asking whether a detail was true if it sounded emotionally precise. I replied that David was responsible for lying about our marriage, while she was responsible for publishing private stories without understanding their source. Both statements could be true without making us friends or rivals. That ended our contact. David did not lose his job. I never contacted his employer because the reviewed records showed no misuse requiring a report, and humiliation was not a financial remedy. He continued managing installations and moved into a permanent apartment near Columbus. Naomi continued editing and teaching workshops after removing no paper needed from her professional biography. The district stopped using the guide. Monica told the workshop supervisor only that the material contained disputed personal content and should not be redistributed. No staff announcement named me. For several weeks, 2 colleagues asked whether the podcast host had turned out to be the person I knew. I said it was a private matter and changed the subject. Most people accepted the boundary. Ordinary restraint protected me more than a viral disclosure could have. The harder part happened in quiet rooms. I would hear a man on the radio swallow before an important word and feel my shoulders tighten. I stopped listening to podcasts in the car because every conversational pause sounded engineered. When someone quoted a simple line about love online, I wondered whose kitchen, illness, or apology had been polished out of it. As a speech-language pathologist, I had spent years teaching children that a voice was more than sound. It carried intent, timing, identity, and trust. Now the voice I had known best had become the least reliable evidence in my life. Therapy helped me distinguish suspicion from observation. If David emailed about a closing document, I answered the document rather than searching his punctuation for hidden meaning. If a friend told a story differently from the way I remembered it, I asked a question instead of treating variation as theft. Recovery was not the promise that no one would deceive me again. It was the ability to respond to what I could verify without making every uncertain detail responsible for my safety. I also had to decide what to do with the cedar box. At first, I wanted to give David everything inside it. The wedding cards, Helen's hospital bracelet, ticket stubs, and his letters felt contaminated by the public versions he had manufactured. Aaron asked whether surrendering the box would return those years to him or merely remove my access to my own past. I sorted it over 3 evenings. I gave David the bracelet and the letters he had written to his mother. I kept photographs that mattered independently of him, notes from Helen addressed to me, and the original letter in my handwriting. I placed my letter in a plain archival sleeve, not because I planned to prove ownership in court, but because I refused to let its misuse decide whether I could keep it. The sentence at the end still described the woman I had been during Helen's illness. David's repetition of it did not erase mine. 9 months after filing, we met with our attorneys for the final settlement conference. David looked older and more direct. He apologized without asking me to approve the wording. He said he had treated experiences as raw material and people as separate audiences, and closing the show could not restore what he had taken. I told him I hoped he continued understanding that after there was no one present to hear him say it. The remark was sharp, but it was also true. He nodded. We signed the settlement. The divorce became final 13 months after the staff workshop. There was no trial, no public confession, and no final episode. For the first time in 8 years, the second Sunday of the month was only a date. That fall, my district created a family resource page with short audio introductions from specialists. Each person was asked to record 60 seconds explaining what families could expect from an evaluation. I postponed mine for a week. Writing the script was easy. Pressing the red button was not. The first version sounded polished and distant. I used a careful workshop voice that placed every consonant correctly and revealed nothing. I deleted it. In the second version, I introduced myself as Claire Mercer, explained that I helped students find practical ways to communicate, and told parents that pauses were welcome in my room. Halfway through, a stack of picture cards slid off my desk. I caught them, laughed, and said, "That is also something you can expect." Then I finished the message. I almost edited out the interruption. Instead, I listened once for accuracy, confirmed that I had not included a student's name or private information, and uploaded the recording as it was. 2 days later, a father I had never met wrote that his daughter replayed the introduction because the laugh made my office sound less frightening. There was no audience large enough to turn the message into a brand. There was one family preparing a child for a difficult appointment. That was enough. At home that evening, I opened the recording on my laptop. The page showed my full name above a simple play button. No silhouette, no alias, no borrowed memory. I heard the pause, the falling cards, and the laugh I had decided not to remove. For years, David had used a microphone to make a hidden life sound complete. I did not need mine to create another version of myself. I pressed play, heard my own voice tell the truth about the room I was actually in, and let it remain exactly where I had put it.